This session is data-driven scaling, leveraging the 5 pillars of data mastery for growth. You will be tested at the end, so listen carefully. 5. Being a truly data-driven company is more than just collecting vast amounts of data. It's about integrating analytics into decisions, as we all know. In this session, we will explore the 5 foundational elements essential for evolving into a data-driven organization: robust infrastructure, insight generation processes, resource allocation, governance, and a supportive culture. In the back, can you repeat that, please? No. In this session, Dan LeBlanc, CEO and co-founder of Daasity, will lead a discussion with Isabelle Chafkin, Harper Wilde's VP of Operation and Finance, and Calvin Lammers, Necessaire's SVP of Digital and Media. They will discuss how they've implemented these key pillars to achieve scalable, data-driven expansion for their brands. Take it away.
Hey everybody, I'm Dan LeBlanc, CEO and co-founder of Daasity. We are a data analytics platform for consumer brands. We've got 2 amazing guests here that I'll let them introduce themselves in a minute. But first, on your table should be something like this. Use that to follow along as we chat with both Izzy and Calvin. It's gonna help you understand where you are on your trajectory as a brand in terms of being a data-driven organization. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over first to Calvin. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Dan. Excited to be here. Calvin Lammers, SVP of Digital and Media at Necessaire. For those of you who don't know Necessaire, we're a personal care company. You range of products, premium luxury body wash, body lotion, hair care. Digitally native company. We've been around for about 6 years and had the pleasure of working with Dan and the Daasity team for a little over 3 of those years. So excited to be here and chat data.
And Izzy?
I'm Isabelle Chafkin. I'm the VP of Finance and Ops at Harper Wilde, which is a role that I only half-jokingly refer to as the fun police. And we are a digitally native, direct-to-consumer intimates company, so bras and underwear. We say we make the world a more comfortable place for womankind. And we have been clients of Daasity's for almost 5 years now, I think, and worked with Dan actually at another company before, so Dan and I go way back.
Great. So super excited to have you both here. We're going to talk about this data-driven framework, and it's built off of 5 pillars to really help you make sure that you become a data-driven organization, and hear from both Izzy and Calvin about how we're tackling each of those pillars. Let's start with a quick overview. So you have insights. What type of analytics and insights do you want from your organization? Infrastructure. What are the tools and either software or hardware that you have to enable you to become data-driven? Resources, financial and human. What resources do you have for your organization? Governance and planning. What are the tools, the processes, and procedures that you have to make sure that everything you're doing from a data perspective is right, but more importantly, from an insight and analytics perspective? And then this organization and culture. How do we make sure that data and being analytically driven is something that is really at the center or at the core of a company and an important competency? So I'm going to start with Izzy on the far left. As we talk about insights, and insights being really more how we think about what's the intent that we want to have, I'd love to hear how, as Harper Wilde from its early foundings to where you are today, how that insight and desire to have insights and level of insights has changed over time.
Sure, yeah, so we were talking about insights being the intention setting, right? Like what level of insight do you want? And I don't think that is kind of set for the entire organization. You can have kind of different insight aspirations depending on the ecosystem, depending on the channel, depending on the function, right? And so, Dan, I believe the 4 levels are descriptive.
Yes, so there are 4 levels of insights. You have descriptive, what happened. You have diagnostic, why did it happen? You have prescriptive, what should we do? In other words, something happened, what should we do next? And predictive, which is what will happen? If I take a certain action, what will happen? Those are the 4 levels of insight that you can aspire to obtain.
Yeah, and so, I think we think about those very much as a pyramid, with predictive being at the very top of the pyramid, and we want to have the capability to have predictive analytics kind of as an organization, but we don't necessarily need to invest those resources kind of at every point of the organization, right? And so where we lean into that predictive capability is very asset intensive functions. So namely inventory planning and customer acquisition and retention. Those are the big spend buckets, right? So we've developed predictive capabilities there, but something like, say, shipping and fulfillment, we are totally happy being diagnostic. Diagnostic is kind of table stakes. If shipping rates go up, we need to know why they went up, but we don't need to be kind of aggressively predictive.
Yeah, and at Necessaire, very much in the same vein, we also view it as a growth journey as well, with the intention on the level of insights. So the asset, spend, resource, heavy departments or areas of focus. For us, being a digitally native company, is our marketing spend and paid acquisition spend. So that was priority number 1, in really building to be a predictive, insights level or focused insights level. But that it was a process to get there. So first we started at really just making sure that we could be prescriptive and getting that level of insight. But as we've added more channels, more data points, more media platforms to the mix, it became more and more important to essentially build out a more or less MMM model for us to really make sure that we are being intentional with the heavier spend levels and multiple channels that we now have in the mix. On the inventory side, similar thing. We had one channel, DTC only. As we've become omni-channel and demand planning has become more and more complex, that is certainly one that we've set the intention to be at a prescriptive level now, as we brought on demand planning help and really make sure that we're buttoned up on our production and buys to support all of our growth channels.
Thank you. Yeah. So what's really insightful here from my perspective is you may have different departments or different areas that are going to be at different level of insights. And that's really important to understand, is that you're not going to be equally analytical in every single area. So as we think about both infrastructure and resources, on those 2 aspects, we think about kind of the software, hardware. So whether you're starting off in Excel or maybe you've gone and built a data warehouse, and on the resources, kind of the people and financial maybe resources that you have to apply to that. Calvin, I'll start with you. How has your journey from where you started to where you are now on both of those aspects changed over time?
Yeah, so I'll caveat saying we still are not completely out of spreadsheets or Google Sheets. That there still is a portion of that, and this came up in a conversation earlier, where that journey is definitely a two-way street with multiple areas. So in many instances, we'll start in Google Sheets or kind of the base kind of resources and build into models. Again, with our journey just as a company, focus primarily on our digital platforms. As we've gone into omni-channel, and retail data, that really up until last year was managed and planned in spreadsheets. This year, that's been a priority for us to integrate and build that model, that data, into Daasity, so that we actually have a live model and really kind of enhance the capabilities and have the tools and resources for our team members to make full use of. So that's really been our journey.
And what do you think the outcome will be of being able to add that retail data into the data warehouse? Like, what's the value that comes out of it?
Ultimately, it's allowing for us to make data-backed decisions and really have a robust, confident model that everybody has access to. I think that's key for us, is that everybody within the organization has access to that data and that model, and really we're going into all of our decision making with this data-backed information to make sure that we're confident while making those decisions, especially with resource-heavy areas like it.
And Izzy, how does that compare? How would you compare your sort of experience at Harper Wilde to Calvin's?
I would say it's very similar, right? You add infrastructure when you need it. And I feel like the very quick rule of thumb is you need it when you are either A, considering adding headcount to keep running things manually without the infrastructure, because it's inefficient, or two, when you start making unforced errors because you have kind of poor data visibility. And those are really the kind of trigger points where you should get some infrastructure.
And Izzy, you've at Harper Wilde, you take a little bit of a different approach from sort of a human resource perspective than Calvin, where they've gone and added staff. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So my hot take is that I don't believe in analysts, not to offend any of the analysts in the room, but I'm a big believer in what I like to call data literacy. So really empowering operators to pull their own reports, which sometimes is kind of not the fastest way to get to that data, but I think it creates much richer insights because those operators have just a more holistic view of the business. So we have kind of solved for that, I think, with hiring. At every level of the organization, when we hire, there's a data project required, and so we kind of self-select people in for that. And then we also, our co-founders, co-CEOs are both ex-consultants, so very, very data-driven, and it's just part of the culture, and it would be embarrassing to show up to a meeting and not have mastery over your own data.
So I think that's really interesting, that you mentioned that you mentioned this need for everybody in the organization to be data-driven and be able to pull their own data. One of the areas that's really important is this governance and planning, and I'm curious to hear from you because I know that there are companies out there where we might say conversion is a really important metric, and you have two different people giving you the different conversion number because one decided that they're going to pull conversion straight out of Google Analytics, and the other person said, well, actually the right way of doing it is taking what my .com platform says and using that as my source of orders and using GA for maybe traffic and doing that math outside. And so that creates a challenge around how do we define metrics? And so I'm really curious from Harper Wilde's perspective, you now have all of these individuals that have access to the data, but how do you make sure that you've got the right processes and procedures and definitions to make sure that when we're talking about the same things that we're having that similar language?
Sure. So I think there are a couple of things in that. One I think is whether you are setting KPIs or OKRs, whatever system you subscribe to, that's a separate conversation. But when you are setting those, you need to align up front on exactly kind of what the definition is going to be. And we now have aligned as an organization that we won't set a KR unless we have the infrastructure to measure that on, ideally a weekly, at least a monthly basis, because we definitely, not too long ago, embarrassingly, set an all-company KR that we hadn't aligned on how we were going to measure it. It was, funny you mentioned conversion. It was a conversion KR. And we got to the end of the quarter, and our co-CEOs asked, how did we perform against this? Me and our VP of marketing were like, well, there are like 3 ways to measure that, actually, and we don't really know. So I think, there's that piece of just alignment on exactly what the metrics are. And it's really basic things sometimes. And so like Dan calls this governance and planning. I was joking, I call this law and order because it can get absolutely lawless. Like talk about conversion rate. Like sometimes you don't even have the same definitions for what a week is or a month, right? Like, are we on NRF? Are we on calendar? And so just cleaning that stuff up goes a really, really long way to preventing swirl. And I also think creating a culture of just showing your work. So if you do present a statistic, just having the data to back it up readily available.
And so the last pillar is really about organization and culture. How do you drive this throughout the organization? I think, Calvin, you've got a really interesting story in terms of what Necessaire has done to make sure that being data-driven is so important and is pervasive across the company.
Yeah, it really starts from at the top and kind of transfers all the way down. So, our CEO, has full access to all of our data sets. We utilize Looker for all of our dashboard reporting. Every person in the organization has a Looker access, so they are able to pull their own data, and that really kind of forces and kind of sets the tone from the get-go. Through our interviews, really kind of making sure that we're bringing on all talent is analytically minded, curious, inquisitive, and they have the resources to do it. And it's really brought about a data-backed decision-making culture. Every meeting we go into, we need to kind of similar to what Izzy spoke to. We have the data backed up for this decision-making. Ultimately, there's some of those decisions that you have to blend some intuition along with data, but still having that data piece is crucial in all processes.
And Izzy, what would you say about the cultural side of sort of the transformation that's happened from Harper Wilde, from sort of the inset to where you are today?
Sure, I think it's just peer pressure, right? It's just, I think we're a very meeting-driven culture, and so we're kind of discussing things live, and so people just need to be very fluent. And I think in order to kind of support that shift within organization and culture, you really need the infrastructure, the resources, the governance and planning, all of that, so that people feel really supported to be able to lean into that culture.
So if you had to sum up in a couple of sentences, the framework and sort of using this framework to help you go from when you started just back in the sort of Excel, I'm doing things manually way, to where you are today, and kind of describe how that journey's been. I'll start with you, Calvin.
Mm-hmm.
How would you kind of describe sort of where you were and where you kind of are today, and sort of maybe the good, bad, and the ugly about that journey?
Yeah. So I think to continue with the law and order, lawlessness theme, we very much were in the wild, wild west, where we had all of our reporting was in Excel. We had no defined KPIs, targets that we were all collectively goaled or measured on. Marketing was not talking to operations in terms of products we were marketing or putting our spend behind. So we feel that we're not quite at our final stage yet. We are still in the process of building that out. But we definitely feel we're much more structured, methodical, and data-orientated with all of our decision-making. And I think that's made us smarter as an organization. And it's also allowed us to define and feel kind of those pain points, like when we're starting to see things break, when we're starting to see issues pop up, and kind of having a better handle on what to solve for that. Is it a resource internally? Is it a platform? Is it external? And really just making sure that we have the processes in place and data infrastructure to support our growth, across spend allocation, across inventory decisions, across headcount decisions. And we feel like we're in our teenage years, so we're not quite college yet, but we're growing up.
Fantastic. And Izzy, how would you kind of share your experience in the same same framework?
We're probably in middle school. You guys are a larger organization. But I think where we've really been focusing has been just kind of setting the right OKRs to align incentives across the company. So I think one of the things we were just kind of chatting about casually before this is we have added Amazon recently as an additional channel, and with that kind of blows up what the standard marketing metrics were before. And so we've had to transition to like a blended CPO target instead of these, kind of by channel CAC targets, because it's like, okay, we want everyone to be thinking about this holistically. This is like an investment decision, right? So I think that's always the journey, right? Is evolving the KRs to meet the changing needs of the business and make sure that everyone is kind of communicating effectively and leveraging data to back up those decisions.
Yeah, each area is its own journey in and of itself, like you said.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, right? In terms of you're bringing in a new channel or maybe you're launching something new, something's changing in the business, and so the expectation that that area will be at the same level across whether it's insights, infrastructure, resources is unrealistic. And so it's in some ways like you'll regress back to the early days of being a one-person startup or a two-person startup in that little area, because that's how you have to operate, and you'll start to build up these different pillars. And so what's important is to understand or to kind of take away is the pillars are not necessarily all going to be at the same level for success. You're going to be at different levels, and you're going to progress at different levels depending upon the size of your organization. So we've got kind of 5 takeaways for each of the pillars that are going to be really important, that things you should be striving for today. And hopefully this is a little checklist that can help you in terms of, are you data driven or not? If you're thinking about insights, we talked about the 4 level of insights. You really want to be at that diagnostic level. In other words, why did it happen? You need to be there so that you can actually monitor your business and be able to make changes to it. On the infrastructure side, you might be in Excel, you might be reporting tools. At some point, you're going to need to build a data warehouse, and don't do it yourself. Why? Because of the resources. If you're a brand and you're under 100 million, you should be spending no more than 1% on analytics. If you're over 100 million, you should be spending between 1/4 and 0.5% on analytics. To put that in dollar figures, if you're $1 million, if you're doing 100 million in revenue, that means you should spend no more than 250,000. That's like 2 people. Think about that. So if you are analysts, and what you want are analysts, not data engineers, which is why you should outsource. On the governance side, set definitions around your KRAs. What's a week? What is conversion? Those metrics that Izzy was mentioning. And then finally, on the cultural side, what Calvin was sharing about, it's got to be tops down. There's your 5 takeaways on how to build a data-driven organization using the 5 pillars. Thank you, and feel free to please chat with Calvin and Izzy and their experience. They're more than happy to share about what it takes to become a data-driven organization.
Thank you.
Thank you.